This is probably the longest script I've ever had in my life, and I just recorded all of it and the mic wasn't on, and I also had a Wario costume I was gonna wear for this, and they won't deliver it for some reason. I'm losing my mind, but I gotta keep the momentum up. Leave luck to heaven. A statement that sounds like the last thing a youth pastor says before hitting a dirty G chord on his acoustic guitar. But this is actually the most commonly accepted English translation of what we're talking about today, Nintendo. For the billions of people worldwide who have the courage to identify themselves as a gamer, Nintendo isn't a video game company, it's the video game company. So many of us have a core memory of going to your older cousin's house and they're playing on a Nintendo console and it's plugged into one of those fat TVs, and you sit down next to them and suddenly you're being guided down the hall of video game greatness by Sherpas like Mario, Zelda and Link, Banjo and Kazooie, Sonic the Hedgehog if you lived during the time where Sega gave up on making consoles. And after that brief walk through our first experiences, video games became a lifelong passion, an isolating and sad passion, but a passion nonetheless. And because of this, Nintendo became synonymous with gaming. To me, Nintendo is the Walt Disney Company of the interactive electronic experience. The legendary IP in Nintendo's roster is unmatched in the rest of the industry. What do you think this dipshit is bringing to the table? Listen, I love the PS1, but Crash has got nothing on this guy. Mario is the face of the entire gaming industry, a working class hero with a relatable story. Mario's been a plumber, a doctor, a tennis ace, a soccer star, a champion kart racer, interstellar explorer, and possibly the greatest party host since Shay Gatsby. And he also tries and fails to get a girlfriend in almost every one of his games. Is that not extremely relatable? Is that not looking in a mirror? Even The Legend of Zelda is iconic. Every time one of those games releases, workforce power goes down, people call out sick. And even the cultural impact, like raise your hand if you had any idea what an ocarina was before Legend of Zelda. You didn't. It's a corny flute that lets you time travel. So what's the secret sauce behind Nintendo's power? That's a fun little pun. Well, calibrate your Wiimotes and prepare to break every tendon in your wrist, because today we're going monkey balls deep on the Nintendo lore. Is Monkey Balls a good example for that? I mean, it is on a Nintendo console, but it was a Sega IP. I'm overthinking it.
Did you see the latest Nintendo newsletter?
Whoa, nice graphics. I'd like to get my hands on that game.
You mean you haven't played it yet? We can play it on my Nintendo Entertainment System.
Oh my god, I'm so pissed I fucking didn't record any of this. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by a man named Fusahiro Yamaguchi, and they started by making playing cards, which was weird. That's a long ass time ago, by the way, 1889. Nintendo literally predates the Titanic, both Roosevelt administrations, and the fucking airplane. And playing cards does seem like a weird place to start for a company that brought us something like Candy Kong. But if you think about it, card games were the original local multiplayer game, and also gave a way for unathletic people to beat their athletic friends at something. So it kind of makes sense. In 1889, gambling was illegal in Japan. So to sidestep this, Yamaguchi made these things called Hanafuda cards. These weren't straight up the playing cards we're used to with the numbers on them and the guy stabbing himself in the head. These Hanafuda cards just had a bunch of pictures on them, like a picture of an animal or a bird or an object, whatever the fuck. That way, whoever was gambling with them could just associate a number with the picture on the card, that way sidestepping the gambling laws. This inextricably ties Nintendo's history with the Yakuza, a Japanese version of organized crime. So it's kind of a full circle moment when Nintendo announced that a Yakuza game was gonna come to Nintendo Switch for the first time like 2 days ago. Crazy timing. So things are moving on, they keep making cards, things are going good, and then in 1956, Hiroshi Yamaguchi, the third president of the company. And I still pronounced it wrong. I put a G in Yamaguchi. It's Yamauchi. I'm a moron. I was so tired. Took a trip to the glorious American metropolitan city of Cincinnati, Ohio, for some reason. This was for a meeting at the headquarters of the United States Playing Card Company, which is headquartered in Cincinnati, which kind of makes sense. Cincinnati seems like a place that would be very proud of that fact. And after seeing how small fry the operation was in Cincinnati, Yamaguchi decided that he had to really expand the company beyond just playing cards in order to make it in this world. It also could have been too many bowls of that nasty Skyline chili, but whatever happened, it shook that man to his core. After brokering a deal with Disney to put their characters on Nintendo playing cards, Nintendo went public, and that little decision made the Nintendo bucks start flowing in. The influx of money let Nintendo focus on trying to find the next big thing. What was going to be their legacy moving on from here? And they settled, of course, what we all know them for today, on mediocre vacuums and instant rice. That can't be right. Okay, alright, well they did do that, I guess, and it did not work out too good. So to stay relevant in the 60s, after they stopped making the playing cards and the rice and vacuums weren't working out, they started floating over towards the toy market. I mean, they were already making cards with Mickey Mouse on them, so like, it makes sense that they were in that area. They introduced a bunch of new toys in quick succession, including table soccer, home bowling, and of course, the Ultra Hand. The Ultra Hand was Nintendo's best-selling toy in 1966, which just goes to show how desperate children were to play with anything back then. And also, this eventually led to the WiiWare game Grill Off with Ultra Hand, which it was a mediocre game, but it was a cool callback to their origins. Then, after realizing kids were desperate, they kept pushing into that market. In the late 60s and early 70s, Nintendo decided to expand into an electronic game, with Nintendo's Beam Gun being one of the first electronic game things to have in Japan at the time. It came out in 1970, and I want to clarify that this was not the NES Zapper. It was way before that. This was just a dumb toy that had like remote control technology, and you'd point it at a little dude and he'd fall down if you hit your target, but it did inspire games like Duck Hunt and the NES Zapper later down the line, but we are not there yet, so you need to relax a little bit. Via a partnership with a consumer electronic company, Magnavox, Nintendo reintroduced the light gun as a controller 2 years later for the Magnavox Odyssey. The Odyssey being one of the first commercially available home video game consoles you could have, but that was not the NES Zapper. I want to make that, stop trying to rush ahead, we're gonna get there. Anyway, let's move on to the next era in Nintendo's history. After this ad, Ooh, I tricked your ass. Play it. Cell phones. The things that keep you entertained on the toilet while you're fighting for your life. Honestly, I can't imagine living in the 90s and not having a screen to look at in the bathroom. That must have been some kind of living hell. But every gift comes with a price in this life. And with cell phones, the price is dealing with terrible service providers and confusing data plans. But worry not, fellow phone addicts, because Mint Mobile is here to save the day. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless coverage on the T-Mobile network. With prices so reasonable, it'll make your grandma say, yeah, that's a pretty good deal. I'd take that. They don't have retail stores or salespeople. So by cutting out the overhead that comes with owning retail stores, it makes things a lot easier for the common man looking for coverage. And all plans include unlimited talk, text, and data on the nation's largest 5G network, which I personally need when I end up doom scrolling for hours on end because one of my videos didn't do well and I need to cope somehow. And although these big companies make it feel like it's a task and a half to switch over to another provider, it's actually shockingly easy. You can sign up and activate within minutes using eSIM from the comfort of your own home and keep your phone number and all your existing contacts when you switch. And if you think that's hard, then you're just a lazy person and I can't help you. Plus, all of Mint Mobile's plans come with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. So if you want to be silly and try and get return on it, you can. I mean, 95% of users say they're extremely satisfied with Mint's customer care, so you'd probably be pretty crazy not to enjoy it. So if you want to switch and save like a smart cookie, use the link below. New users can get the unlimited plan for only $15 a month for the first 3 months. So thank you to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this video. Mint Mobile, a breath of fresh air. And that's not their slogan, but it should be. That's a fantastic slogan, and I wouldn't be surprised if they use it after seeing this.
The challenge is Metroid. The power is Nintendo. Defend the planet Xephus against the evil Mother Brain. It's survival or destruction. To battle or die. Metroid only from Nintendo.
It's the 1980s, and friend of the channel, The Cold War, is raging on. I don't know why I always end up talking about the Soviets. Am I a communist? But the nuclear sector wasn't the only thing enjoying an arms race, because this is the time in history when the first console wars came into effect. Nintendo established itself as a contender pretty early on with several iconic arcade games, perhaps none more famous than Donkey Kong. This was the first game to introduce Mario to the world, as well as the mechanic of an Italian man jumping over barrels, which is seen in almost every AAA game nowadays. And this classic tale of man versus large monkey achieved the highest grossing sales of any arcade cabinet between 1981 and 1982. And this game not only introduced two of the most iconic video game characters ever to exist, but also introduced one of the biggest geniuses in the video game industry, Shigeru Miyamoto. God, look at that face, look at that smile. Dubbed the Steven Spielberg of video games by Time Magazine, Miyamoto created some of the most classic games that Nintendo has ever put out, including Super Mario Bros. And Legend of Zelda. And he did that after his success as the lead designer on Donkey Kong, which is great. Those are like 3 of the biggest IPs ever to exist. After interviewing at Nintendo in 1976 because his dad was a friend of Yamaguchi's, Miyamoto started as a humble staff artist creating artwork for arcade cabinets. They gave him the assignment of finding something to do with 2,000 arcade cabinets that were going unused because of the failed game Radar Scope. And he was like, fuck it, let's make Donkey Kong and put it in there. Let's see if that works out. And it did, because it was one of the most technically advanced games for its time in 1981. It had graphics, it had cutscenes, it had several stages, it had moving platforms, which I know right now seems not that cool, but it was a big deal back then. This led to Donkey Kong bringing in $200 million in quarters, which I can't even comprehend what that looks like, and the success gave Miyamoto control of all video game development at Nintendo. After a couple Donkey Kong sequels, because if you have a game that big, you have to milk it for all it's worth, Miyamoto expanded the Nintendo canon with the next game, Mario Bros., which was the first viewing we ever got to see of this lanky fuck we call Luigi. This wasn't Super Mario Bros., by the way. I always mix these two up. Mario Bros. Was a game where 2 brothers lived in a sewer and they stepped on turtles, and Super Mario Bros. Was the game on the NES. But once again, we're gonna get to the NES. You need to fucking slow down. At the same time, Nintendo was branching into the handheld game market with the Game & Watch, featuring the character Mr. Game & Watch, that creepy, flat, black character that all the neckbeards use in Smash Brothers. The Game & Watch also did pretty well. It sold 40 million units between 1980 and 1990, and the idea came about when the designer Gunpei Yokoi, I hope I said that right, he was on his train home from work and he saw a businessman so bored that he ended up taking out his calculator from his pocket and playing around with it. And Yokoi was thinking to himself, God, are people so fucking bored that they're willing to play around with numbers on a calculator? And he was right. He was right to exploit that boredom. So moving on from that, Nintendo thought to themselves, damn, people like fiddling around with bright lights and buttons. What else can we do? Enter the Nintendo's Family Computer, or Famicom as it's most referred to as today. This first attempt at a console from Nintendo was supposed to be the answer to Atari's home console, this wood-paneled shitbox. With a simple VCR design and game cartridges that could hold more than 7 times the amount of RAM than Atari's, it was a sure shot that Nintendo would dominate this industry. But the Famicom wasn't built right, and they had to recall a bunch of them because it kept shitting itself. And the video game market crashes. It crashed in 1983, bad timing. There were a lot of reasons why the video game market crashed in 1983, but it seems the biggest killer was the fact that people were paying a lot of money for video game consoles and video games themselves, and there was little to no quality control for these things. The obvious example for this mentality was the E.T. game that was designed so poorly and sold so poorly that they had to dump a bunch of them in a landfill in the desert. But yeah, shit was not looking good for the future of gaming and therefore the future of Nintendo. But Nintendo decided they would make this work by doing 2 things. 1, releasing a console that actually worked by reissuing a bunch of the Famicoms, and 2, making sure their games were always fun and well built, an ethos that they hold to this day. That's why all their games still have this cute little seal on it that says Nintendo approved, so you know it's a good game. Isn't that fun and cute? So once the Famicom was reissued and the games were doing pretty well, the Famicom became the best-selling console in all of Japan. Then Nintendo attempted a partnership with Atari to release a North American version of this console. You know Atari, the people responsible for the video game crash everyone's about to experience. But this partnership blew apart in 1983 when Atari representatives decided to visit a sexy little convention called Summer Consumer Electronics Show. Good lord. And when they were there, they saw competitor Coleco messing around with an illegal version of Donkey Kong on their new Coleco computers, so it wasn't a good optic for Nintendo. Not great for their anti-piracy efforts that Coleco was just messing around with their games on their own console. Then Atari fired their CEO, so the conversation got weird and they ultimately canceled the deal with Nintendo. But it was for the best, because that gave Nintendo the final push to create their own console without any outside help. So after major success in America with the arcade classic Nintendo Versus system in 1985, Nintendo defied critics saying that the video game market was completely dead and released the NES not soon after. By the way, the Versus arcade cabinet was a really cool idea. It was like a bunch of games that they put all in one cabinet, and then they said, hey, soon you'll be able to play this in your own house. Can you believe that? You know that thing you've only been able to experience by putting quarters into a machine? You can play that on your TV now. Oh my god. I'm going blind. The future is so bright. This is it, baby. The no turning back moment that would change the world in a way that even Thomas Edison couldn't predict. Ladies and gentlemen, the Nintendo Entertainment System. You kind of ruined it by jumping ahead so many times, though. You make your own decisions. I'm not gonna, whatever. The NES launched with iconic games like Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, Ice Climbers, Pinball, Wrecking Crew, Clue. Okay, well, if the list falls off a little bit, but the first 3 were fantastic. It reframed Americans' perception of video games, which, as I mentioned in the mid-80s, was plagued by bad marketing and inconsistency. Nintendo simply gave a fuck and made the games good and also packaged them in a way that wasn't a complete lie. The graphics on the box looked like the graphics in the game. Before then, other companies were just putting hyper-realistic graphics on the boxes, and then you'd open it up and it would look like this. Bringing the NES to toy stores and censoring any profanity and sexual content led to Nintendo's success with children, who were previously not seen as the primary consumer for video games, which is wild to think about. Like, ever since I was little, video games have been for children, and now they're more for adults, but like, you know, it was always like, oh, go play your video games, kids, and people would make fun of you. And also, you know how video games are for boys? Like, not really, girls can be gamers. My girlfriend's a gamer, but like, historically, it's always been a boy-dominated area. Well, allegedly, it's because when Nintendo brought their consoles to toy stores, they had to pick between the boys aisle and the girls aisle, and they were like, well, I guess we'll go with boys, and that's why for the next 20 years, boys were marketed for video games, which I don't think of it, I'm not sure if any of that's true. Don't Google it. It sounds right enough to be real, so just believe it. But let's talk about the video games real quick on the NES. As previously mentioned, the NES launched with Super Mario Brothers, which not only gave us a iconic cast of characters and iconic levels, but also the most famous 7 notes in any song from a video game ever. Mushrooms, war pipes, turtle dragons, your princess is in another castle. The production design for this game seems like they knew every single aspect of this was going to be iconic. And this was the first of many paradigm shifts that Nintendo would be responsible for throughout their history. And then Legend of Zelda was just unbelievable in terms of a video game. Before then, arcade games were all about just getting to the next level, dumping quarters into it, becoming extremely hard over time. Legend of Zelda was like, hey, here, you're in a world now. Go look around. See what fucking happens. I don't know. I'm not going to give you any direction. And that was unbelievable at the time. It was pretty much the first, it wasn't a sandbox game, but it was like the first do your own shit game. I don't know what to do next. I'm completely confused. I'm just gonna start burning bushes. Oh my god, is that a cave? A whole cave I can explore? And they didn't even tell me I could do that. Nintendo was hauling ass, and they decided to keep moving in the right direction by releasing the Game Boy in 1989. They launched it with the game Tetris, which I don't know if you've heard of that game. It wasn't very popular. Because of its size and portability, the Game Boy sold pretty well. I think it was 100 million portable machines. I said the wrong number in the original recording, but I was very tired. So giving Nintendo's domination of the handheld and 8-bit console wars, they had no hurry to release an updated console. That was until a new fighter entered the arena. You guys remember Sega, that company I told you gave up on the console wars? Well, at this point in history, they were not giving up. In fact, they were really kicking ass. The Sega Genesis debuted in 1989 and upended the status quo, introducing everyone's favorite Adderall-addicted rodent, Sonic the Hedgehog, in 1991. The Sega Genesis was marketed as a cooler, edgier, more adult console for teens and adults that huffed glue and did karate. This marked a huge difference in marketing with Nintendo's plan, which was always to market to younger audiences, which they still do to this day. Hey Nintendo, why is every 2D Mario baby's first run and jump? I want a little bit of challenge. It's very embarrassing that I have to play those games and feel like I'm being talked down to. Due to this and the fact that Sonic was a cultural revolution, it allowed Sega to outsell Nintendo in 1991. This was shocking at the time, seeing as Nintendo has been dominating the games industry for a very long time up until that point, and Sega showed no signs of slowing. They doubled down on the edgelord shit. They famously added a blood code to Mortal Kombat on their 16-bit console, which made it so you could see the actual violence of the video game itself.
So, you want to know how to do the blood code in Mortal Kombat?
And that led to a whole bunch of controversy, and the government got involved, and they did not like that, and also that became the creation of the ESRB rating, so it was good Nintendo didn't do that at the time, but it still made them look like a bunch of pussies. So Nintendo had to respond with a 16-bit console of their own, and they did. The successor to the NES was the SNES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or the SNES if you want to be quick about it. This console dropped in the early 1990s, and it came packed with a chip that could handle 16-bit graphics. Gee whiz, it's the future now. But the release did seem a bit rushed. There was not a lot of games that came out with the console at launch. Japan had Super Mario World, Pilot Wings, and F-Zero, and additional 2 for the American releases, Gradius 3 and SimCity. That being said though, this console could have only launched with one game, Super Mario World, and the console would have flown off the shelf. Super Mario World was the Super Nintendo's best-selling game of all time. It also featured the debut of Yoshi, another Miyamoto-created legend. Gamers couldn't get enough of Yoshi. They were asking questions like, who is this cool little green guy? And am I punching him in the back of the head every time I do that move? Well, that seems fucked up. The SNES also had other great hits like Donkey Kong Country, which jump-started the developer Rare's run of hit game after hit game for Nintendo consoles. Star Fox was another SNES hit, opening up new worlds for 3D gamers to experience through the eyes of an anthropomorphic fox, proving once again that Nintendo had extreme foresight into situations that no one comprehended at the time, because for some reason they knew anthropomorphic foxes was going to be a big thing in the future. Ultimately, Sega was the loser in this war. They tried to collaborate with Sony and that fell through, but that became the PlayStation, then launching a series of step-kid consoles like the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast, which just scooped the final bits of dirt under the shallow grave of the Sega consoles. The Dreamcast was sick though, I will say that. They had a bunch of very unique, interesting games on it, and also had like a cool little thing on the controller where you could unplug this thing and plug it back in. But Nintendo wasn't dealing with gimmicks and unique shit. They were just mainlining classic after classic after classic, so it's pretty hard to compete with that.
Yo, listen up.
We will not live in a two-dimensional world.
We won't go in one direction or see where we can say.
We will walk through walls. We will take a look around us.
So things move on, Sega's out of the way, and Nintendo's looking at a clear path to the finish line of video game monopoly. Yeah, there's a few other companies like Sony trying to jump in, but you know, for the most part it was clear sailing. In 1996, Nintendo decided to shake the foundation of the gaming world again by releasing another console, and this one was a big baller, big dick move. The natural progression of systems at the time was 8-bit, 16-bit, and of course the next one would be 32-bit consoles. Sony released the PS1 in 1994, and that was pretty much the poster child of 32-bit graphics. The PS1 was my childhood console, by the way. I fucking love the PS1. Bugs Life, that was a fantastic game. But Nintendo was like, you know what, we could make a 32-bit console, but that's kind of pussy shit. Let's make a 64-bit one and fuck everything up. And I know it sounds silly nowadays, but like when you went to a game store in the 90s, you would ask the retail person, which one of these has the most bits? Because that was extremely important to the common consumer. And Nintendo felt so confident in what they had, they didn't even give it a flashy name like the Genesis or the Saturn. They simply called it the Nintendo 64, a name so iconic and at the same time extremely lazy and uninspired. The Nintendo 64 proved to be another watershed moment in gaming, with so many titles that embody perfection to gamers to this day. Super Mario 64 set the industry standard for 3D platformers, something that people still can't figure out to this day. Both Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time solidified what a 3D adventure game should feel like, despite what everything Aaron Hansen said in Sequelitis. And then we had shit like Star Fox 64, Mario Kart, Mario Party, and GoldenEye 007, all defining their respective genres. The advancements in 3D graphics and storytelling propelled the N64 to massive success after it launched in Japan and North America. But its real legacy was cementing the local multiplayer movement. It came complete with 4 controller ports, so everyone could sit around and play together. And you could enjoy that local multiplayer while using this iconic controller design. Something that hurts my brain to think about. Although no human hand has ever officially figured out how to hold one of these things, it still did a fantastic job helping first-timers explore 3D space. And despite everything I just said, it fell behind the PlayStation's commercial success, which is kind of a bummer. It was mostly due to hardware delays and higher prices because Nintendo, for some reason, was obsessed with using cartridges and not discs. So Nintendo was like, what's next? What can we do? The PlayStation is kicking our ass. Oh, we have the Game Boy. We forgot about the Game Boy. The Game Boy Advance arrived in 2001, a fantastic year for video games. This was a way more powerful successor to the Game Boy. It also was the final blow in the Nintendo versus Sega console wars, with Nintendo completely cucking Sega by having Sonic Advance debut on the GBA in 2002. Way to rub it in their faces, guys. And then after the Nintendo 64, Nintendo decided to move on to the GameCube. Now, let's have a little talk about this console real quick. If you grew up in the early 2000s, you are going to have a sweet spot for this weird purple little console. Its design was cute. It had a little handle so you could bring it around with you wherever you go if you wanted to do that. It had Double Dash and Melee, two of the best games in their respective series, and it had those tiny little discs, which were kind of cute and fun. Stupid, but fun. But it wasn't a good console, really, at all. It had those Nintendo published games that everyone loves, but every Nintendo console has those. In terms of third-party games, it was abysmal, because apparently it was really hard to program for. The console itself had very little graphical power, and the tiny discs that they made to prevent piracy was not helping that at all. And all of these mistakes might have been passable, except for Sony made the fucking juggernaut PlayStation 2, the best-selling console of all time, around the same time. The PS2 had full-size discs. It had more games than God intended. It had a DVD player. It had a little spot in the back where you could hide your weed. It had everything. The GameCube had Luigi's Mansion, which was a fine game, but you understand the comparison I'm making here. Sony and new arriver Microsoft with the Xbox decided to gear their marketing and games towards more of an adult audience, while Nintendo was still stuck marketing their shit to children, and Nintendo failed to offer much value besides its IPs like Super Mario Sunshine and Metroid Prime. So while still a major player, Nintendo's grasp on the entire industry of video game consoles was slipping away from them every day. But who gives a fuck about that? They still had an iron grip on the handheld gaming market, baby. There was a bunch of Game Boy additions and rebrands that I do not have time to go into. There was like the Game Boy Micro and the Game Boy SP. If you want to learn about this, go watch Scott the Woz. He has dedicated his life to this fight, and I don't want to besmirch his name by giving any less effort than he has. But after all of that success, Nintendo thought to themselves, you know what the Game Boy is missing? 2 screens. We need 2 screens on these fuckers. And also, I don't think gamers have had enough opportunities to rub Mario's face. I wonder if we can get that going. The Nintendo DS was launched in 2004 with 2 screens and a touchscreen so you could rub little Nintendo dogs to your heart's desire. The DS, although initially seen as a mistake with a boxy clamshell design, did eventually break even over time. Nintendo once again moved a modest amount of these puppies, 154.2 million units. Holy fuck. What are you yelling for? And then Sony at the same time had the balls to say, hey, does anyone want to play with the PSP? We made the PSP. Like, read the room. I understand that was a pretty impressive handheld console at the time, but me and the boys are playing Mario Kart in the back of the bus. We don't have time for discs. But in the console market, Nintendo was getting their ass beat, so they decided to go a different route with it. They thought to themselves, we're doing really good with the casual market with the DS. A lot of moms and dads are using this thing. So what if we put that mentality into a console, and also we made a remote where you just kind of do this, and things happen. In 2006, we saw the launch of the Nintendo Wii, and it was fucking crazy. Nintendo has a history of hitting or missing with their consoles, and this was such a hit it would have sunk the USS Buchanan. You couldn't get your hands on these things for a while. They were flying off the shelves. Moms were beating the shit out of elder moms and Toys R Us's. Targeting the games more for adults and people who did not already play video games, we saw unbelievably quicker sales in the GameCube and launched some era-defining games like Wii Sports, Super Mario Galaxy, and so much shovelware. I think the Nintendo Wii is one of the best-selling consoles of all time. I didn't put it in the script, but here's the picture. I'm pretty confident. If you grew up during this time period, you knew someone with a Wii, or you had a Wii, and if you didn't have a Wii, you went to someone's house to play with the Wii. So Nintendo was riding high off this back-to-back success, and they thought to themselves, what can we do next? I don't think we can do anything wrong. And they said to themselves, look out world, we're about to blow your socks off with this next perfect console. In 2012, they proudly released the Wii U to market. In 2017, Nintendo released the Nintendo Switch, the follow-up to the Wii, with no console existing in between them. This console was a little bit more of a gimmick, like the Nintendo Wii, that combined the IPs that Nintendo had with the portability of a tablet. And people ate that shit up. It makes sense because Nintendo has literally never not dominated the handheld market, so they thought to themselves, why don't we just make a handheld home console? And once again, it's one of the best-selling consoles of all time. Put up the graphic, Tucker. It's just crazy that over time, Nintendo has found new innovative ways to control the console market. And the fact that they can make Nintendo fanboys just buy anything when they release a new rare edition color for their console. It's really fucked up how they manipulate them. Good lord, that was so much talking. Okay. I didn't even cover shit like the Virtual Boy or the Power Glove, or the fact that Nintendo has one of the worst copyright policies of all time and will destroy small fan projects with a lift of a finger. But besides that, it's a fun company. Nintendo's innovations in hardware and software, from 3D graphics to interactive use of motion control, have repeatedly pushed the medium of gaming. Instead of a business strategy focused on blindly chasing trends and the next big technological advancement, Nintendo has focused on what it does best: building a unique gaming experience with iconic characters that generate loyal returning customers. Donkey Kong and Mario have been around for 43 years. They will never let that plumber die. And I think the monkey is immortal. I don't think monkeys live that long. Shigeru Miyamoto, the man behind Mario, Yoshi, Yoshi, DK, Zelda, Fox McCloud, and so many other characters we have known for most of our lives, has shaped this company into an international hitmaker that brought this multi-billion-dollar medium back from the dead and sent it to new artistic and creative heights. As this era of the Nintendo Switch dies down, who knows what next innovation Nintendo will bring? Or failure. Who knows what failure they'll bring? It really seems like recently it's been back and forth with dog shit and complete genius. But whatever the future brings, I know whatever Nintendo's gonna drop is gonna be fun as fuck, at least for an afternoon. New videos every Saturday and Wednesday. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stop punching Yoshi. It's fucked up.